Talent acquisition teams everywhere are rushing to put AI to work, often before working out what that actually means in practice. The problem is that technology just amplifies whatever's already there, and what's already there is often a bit of a mess. So, where do you actually start? Keep listening to find out. Support for this podcast comes from Fountain, the AI native platform for managing the global frontline workforce. Fountain has recently announced Q, the first autonomous frontline intelligence designed to run workforce operations. Q runs the work inside hiring workflows, such as sourcing, screening, and scheduling candidates, all without manual intervention. This reduces operational bottlenecks and time to hire while delivering consistent staffing across locations. With Q, you don't start the day with dashboards, you begin with outcomes. For example, 12,000 processed applications and 800 filled roles in less than a day. Q doesn't talk about what it could do, it reports on what it already did. Trusted by hundreds of top frontline employers, including UPS, Sweetgreen, Subway, and more, companies are turning to Q by Fountain to autonomously execute frontline workforce management. Learn more at fountain.com.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 801 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. A growing number of organisations are rushing to implement AI on an industrial scale, often announcing themselves as AI first, before working out what that actually means. What many are finding is that AI tends to surface whatever was already underneath, where the data is patchy, the content conflicting, and no one quite owns the end-to-end processes. The technology exposes all of it rather than fixing any of it. At the same time, AI is starting to change the shape of work itself, raising hard questions about which tasks remain genuinely human and what HR and TA roles look like on the other side. So, what does it take to build foundations solid enough to make these tools deliver? My guest this week is Mark Stelzner, founder and managing principal at IA. In our conversation, Mark explains what it really takes to make AI work in the people function. Hi, Mark, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Pleased to be with you today. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Absolutely. So I am the founder and co-leader of a firm called IA. I founded IA over 20 years ago. As I like to say, it's why I look so young and fresh. The business of transformation is not for the faint of heart, but about 3 decades of transformation work for organizations of all shapes and sizes. We primarily support large-scale people transformation projects on behalf of the Global 1000.
Obviously, transformation is a word that seems to be on everyone's lips at the moment, particularly in HR and talent acquisition. There's obviously a huge amount of pressure around people leaders to transform. From what you're seeing with the global enterprises that you work with, what's actually driving that pressure? And also, how well prepared are organizations to respond to it?
No, great question. And part of this we refer to as sort of the catalyst for change or catalyst for transformation. And many of these have always been true. I think what's new, Matt, is they're all hitting people leaders at exactly the same moment. So one is certainly turnover, the arrival of new senior leaders. Anytime someone comes into the C-suite, that's obviously fostering some level of change, some level of transformation, and that will drive a modification to the organization's vision, to outcome, to market strategy, et cetera. Second is for a lot of the organizations that we work with, they're holding companies, and they're sort of, struggling with the tension between operating as a holding company versus an operating company. And so as they acquire or divest new entities, of course, that's going to change the fabric of the organization as well. Technology and digital innovation, at the risk of stating the obvious, is certainly disrupting the entire world right now. So that's certainly driving change. And then, of course, just vision and mission, a change to the ethos, the outcomes, to what we believe in, to what we care about. New market entry, right? We're bringing new products or services to market. or we're entering new countries. And what's difficult, I think, right now, Matt, for people and talent leaders is the fact that they're also wearing three hats concurrently, particularly CPOs and CHROs. One is I'm the P&L owner for HR, and HR, of course, is being asked to do more and more with less and less. Second is I'm a bit of the flag bearer for what it means for our culture and vision, personification of what we believe in, and therefore I'm going to stand in front of our audiences virtually and in person and claim to represent and amplify what our key care abouts are. And third is I'm the strategic advisor to the CEO and the president. So I'm that confidant that's also supposed to have those quiet backroom conversations to advise those same leaders through this moment of sort of unprecedented change. And as I said earlier, Matt, I think what's difficult, everything is happening everywhere all at once.
So much we can dive into there and not enough time to talk about all of it. So let's dive into the technology part of this first. A lot of organizations kind of rushing to apply AI all over their business. I suppose especially relevant here is in their people processes. What tends to happen when you layer new technology onto old processes? What do you kind of see as the biggest issues there?
Yeah, and AI being as helpful as it is, and I'm making finger quotes as you can see me, will amplify whatever your reality truly is. So the challenges right now in some respects are foundational. Many organizations are declaring from the top, we are an AI first organization. Okay, well, what does that truly mean? It means that the cascading goals and objectives for this particular fiscal year and beyond include both demonstrable tests and production level outcomes that drive some material modification to the affectation of work. And we can spend a lot of time sort of unpacking that as well. But the challenge we see is this is often positioned as a technology looking for a problem versus what you're hinting at, Matt, which is we have problems that are looking for technological enablement. And the foundations that are a bit on quicksand, unfortunately, today are the non-sexy but required dependencies of what you need to do to really bring value forward through these amazing new tools and technologies. We need data that we trust, data that is accurate, data that is timely, data that is integrated. And sadly, that's not the case across our federated enterprises who don't have a single system of record, as it were, for certainly everything that their employees and candidates and alumnus experience. We need authoritative content, which means that we need to have content that, when queried, actually represents what we want that policy or process to bring forward in the context of the individual requester. And that brings its own complexity because we may have good content, but the content really isn't written in a way that's consumable by current AI tools. So we have latency issues or an ability to read certain fields or tables. But more so, what we're finding is organizations have not taken the time to pause and establish global process ownership, establish a strong global point of view relative to the HR end-to-end processes. And therefore, what we're likely to bring in production is just the mess that we've been hiding behind the scenes and probably throwing humans at to control for so many of these complexity factors.
Whenever I've been in conversations about AI, that whole process piece is always kind of front and center in terms of really thinking about what this means. It's all very well to say, but I know that there are lots of people listening who are working in large organizations or complex organizations who feel that they don't have much control over reinventing processes or improving processes. So if that's the kind of starting point, how do you do that in a large, complex, global organization where perhaps no one owns the end-to-end workflow?
Yeah, and onboarding, as we've discussed previously, Matt, is a good example of that, right? Disposition to offer accepted. And then, okay, well, who's accountable and responsible for what happens next, given the fact that that could be facilities and badges, it's provisioning of IT tools and technologies, it might be equipment, personal protective equipment in certain instances. And it certainly means I need to, provide authentication services and I need to bring someone into our processes and policies. And so it's very, very difficult to establish a single point of ownership. But I think it starts with a bit of a forensic investigation and just understanding your current state. If you think about what I do own and what I do have control over, which is, in very, very large organizations tends to be fractional at the individual level, tends to grow, of course, as we move up the people leadership stack. Part of it is just understanding your current situation. and really unpacking the number of variations and the distribution of information and content that you have in your current ecosystem. And let's start even with external service providers. In the TA space and recruiting space in particular, we have a litany of talent acquisition tools and technologies. When we then move someone into our core HR and payroll systems, we have similarly a litany of highly distributed and sometimes not necessarily aggregated or integrated technologies. When we look at our benefits programs, right, boy, it gets really, really complex when we look at the statutory benefits that are in country or in region and the top-up benefits that are offered by employers of choice. And so if we don't write this down, we don't understand what information is truly resident in what systems, what the purpose of each of those tools and technologies was intended to be, what we often find is there's a collision of information. And honestly, typically, Matt, a duplication of information. So we need to start with understanding where information lives. And then from a content side, as I've hinted to earlier, we need to realize that there are probably conflicting rules, policies, and communication initiatives that are going to perpetuate confusion when we put AI in front of it. So again, all of this is really just taking stock of the what. And then I would say the next step is establishing a little bit of the so what. All right, so we find ourselves in a very complex situation. We have a lot of different information. What can we start with that we have confidence in already? Not everything, Matt, in the ecosystem is necessarily broken, but what can we pilot to prove that the tools, in fact, are functional, are factual, are operational, are bringing value? But where we have the highest level of true integration of content and data, how do we bring value first to test, in fact, the efficacy of what these are intending to bring forward? How do we also recognize, Matt, that due to regulatory policies that are really, in some cases, favorable to the employees, what do we do when the employees opt out? What's the next best modality that we're intending to move our employees to during critical moments that matter, or based on preferences, based on language requirements, et cetera? Is that live chat? Is that opening a case in your case management system? Is it walking down the hall to talk to my HR business partner? Because really understanding our personas, our systems, and our content is just foundational to everything else that comes.
Support for this podcast comes from Pebble. I know that many of you listening hire internationally, and you'll be all too familiar with the paperwork and red tape that can really slow things down. That is what Pebble is designed to fix. Pebble makes global hiring simple through embedded compliance and AI-driven workflows. The Pebble platform takes the delays and guesswork out of going global, so founders and HR leaders can move fast without adding risk. Hiring abroad can take months when you do it on your own. With Pebble, you can hire in over 185 countries in minutes and have your new hire onboarded by Monday. Most companies treat compliance as something to manage around. By building a decade of expertise directly into the platform, Pebble removes the fear of mistakes and the dreaded regulatory blind spots. Instead of juggling separate tools for contracts, payrolls, benefits, and compliance, Pebble brings everything together in a single platform that integrates with the tools that teams already use. It also reduces the redundant tasks and manual processes that can cause errors and delays in hiring. The result is a global team that's actually set up to succeed, with accurate pay, real benefits, and the support they need to thrive wherever they are. The bottom line is anywhere is possible with Pebble. With global hiring simplified, founders and HR leaders can spend their time focusing on what and where comes next for their business. There's also a special offer for recruiting future podcast listeners. Pebble is normally $399 a month per employee. Already a no-brainer for what you get, but right now there's a limited time offer on their site that makes it even easier to get started. Go to highpebble.ai before it's gone. That's highpebl.ai. Terms and conditions apply. I want to circle back and pick up on a couple of things you mentioned earlier in the conversation. And the first one is AI's impact on work itself, because this is something that I know increasing amount of CHROs, CPOs, people leaders are kind of wrestling with. It's almost like, where does AI fit? Where do humans fit in the organization? How do we design this? Are you seeing that kind of transformation going on? What's your perspective on it?
Certainly. And I think, a lot of this gets presented in the market as skills taxonomy, dynamic skills assembly, dynamic or total workforce management, because we're not just talking about employees in this context. We're also talking about our contractual, seasonal, temporary labor pools as well. Many organizations, HR doesn't own the tools, technologies, or even the provision of those capabilities. So what this is foundationally bringing into sharp relief, Matt, is what is work? And if we go back to TA for a second, and a requisition and the skills and competencies, the desired qualifications that we unpack when we put this out to the market, part of the interrogation that's going on in some of the market leading organizations is to break down at the skill level again, what skills will be displaced or amplified through agentic capabilities? What skills are truly uniquely human? Basically, if we break the work apart, what work remains? And what we're finding, honestly, for those that have been relatively early adopters of these tools and technologies, the work that's left is heavy and heady and it's intense. And I don't know about you, Matt, but sometimes I don't mind sending a calendar invite. I don't mind, doing some simple work just to give my brain a little bit of a rest. So part of it is just the intentionality about how we think about job architecture, job structure, and the assembly of work. And some organizations, even uniquely now, are saying, well, I might be a people leader, not because I don't have direct reports, but because I have a small army of agents that work for me. Now, that's somewhat controversial. There's a lot of debated, probably another conversation. But really, it starts with what is work? What work do we intend to provision and care for through what capability, be it digital or be it human? How do we assemble those humans to provision the output of work? And then how do we disassemble and reassemble for the purposes of projects, programs, and initiatives? And there's theory out there that's being certainly studied by practitioners and by researchers around, are we all just contingent labor when we really think about it? Because the promise of really permanency associated with work is in some cases truly false. So it's that level of sort of forensic understanding of what drives work and what skill sets, therefore, we need to develop or move people into. And Matt, it's the age old, HR business partners. We want to free you up to provide more strategic value. Well, now we're doing that. Are we prepared to take on that new mantra and truly provide the value that's intended with this new capacity that we found?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting and very fundamental question that lots of people need to think about very carefully, I think. And I suppose related to that, and coming back to another earlier point you made about, HROs also owning the culture of the business, the impact of transformation on people, particularly this technology-driven transformation where people can perhaps sense they don't have as much control as they want or they thought they did. How should organizations be dealing with that?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of cognitive dissonance between, who we claim we are, what we say we do, the values we espouse, and the reality, unfortunately, that our employees are feeling. Now, in some respects, we all live in the real world. That's always been true. We've all been to the launch party of the new value system that becomes our background image on our Zoom calls and is the poster in the cafeteria and so on. So there's always a little bit of cynicism around this, but it really is causing organizations to rethink what is immovable or immutable. Like, what's our actual true north? What are the things that we stand for and that we stand for everyone? Because part of what's manifested now is organizations are recognizing under cost pressures as a people function and cost pressures as an enterprise, we can't afford to offer everything to everyone. Now, again, Matt, oftentimes that's been true for decades. We've had special dispensation for classes of executives, et cetera. But I think this is becoming more complicated in the sense that not everyone is truly being created equal, being treated equal. And when I see things like pay transparency in the EU, I love it because this is forcing us to sort of have some comeuppance with some of the things that we've done behind the scenes. So I like the accountability, but I think it's really a struggle for people leaders today with some level of credibility to stand forward and say, this is who we are. While at the same time, we're seeing reductions in force. We're seeing massive shifts of population. We're seeing movements in geography due to things organizations can't control, like sadly, wars or commerce impacts due to trade and tariffs. And so we're not able to hold on to the theory of what we thought we were. And I think it's forcing us to really question, what does work mean and what do we really stand for as an organization? And honestly, Matt, I think this is manifesting, as I hinted to earlier, some of the turnover we're seeing in senior leadership. A lot of, chief people officers or human resource officers grew up in a different era and are now saying, I don't recognize what we're being asked to do anymore, and I'm not sure that I can sustain my part of this.
And I think that brings me nicely on to the final question, because this isn't one-off transformation. This is a period of constant change that's going to kind of run and run as far as we can see. How do you think ultimately the people function, the HR function, and its operating models are going to have to evolve over the next few years to really keep pace with this?
Well, one thing that is good news for HR is this nonsense about the seat at the table is no longer being discussed, which I greatly appreciate, having spent 3 decades in this industry. So we're squarely in the mix, and we're in the mix for everything. In fact, in some organizations that we work with, HR now owns the transformation office. And I'm not just talking about the people transformation office. I'm talking about the enterprise transformation office. Because, Matt, under your question is the fact that organizational development, organizational effectiveness, organizational design is continuous. We are constantly restructuring and reassembling what we mean by different business units, by different capabilities. We're divesting and acquiring assets faster than we ever have before. And so what it requires then is a confidential function that works with the transformation office if HR doesn't own it, which means we are the transformation office and executing on these visions. And we're really at the board level now. And at the board level, beyond just executive compensation plans and things that, of course, we always were, but that we are reshaping and restructuring the organization constantly. Now, the good news is there's high demand for our skill set as a people function. The bad news is that it's relentless. The days of cutting a logo cake because the transformation's over are behind us. Transformation is endless. We are in continuous improvement, however we want to cast it, continuously and forever forward. So part of this is, how do we structure ourselves in order to prepare ourselves for the constant flywheel of changes in prioritization and execution? And part of it is, how do we maintain a stronger cohort of skilled resources that we can provision to these changing needs on demand? This is the Navy SEALs of HR that we need to send wherever the greatest opportunity, problem, or fix needs to be deployed. And it's happening like it's never happened before. So we're there, but it's incredibly demanding work and bringing a new level of speed and efficiency.
Mark, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Matt. Truly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for the great questions.
My thanks to Mark. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.